I mediate can refer to the position of the fetus within the maternal body in an actual sense. Or it might be understood in a psychic or symbolic sense. This self, at its inception, was neither positive nor negative in its adjustment to the environment. It was a neutral entity, balanced between the two extremes, and thus represented the principle of being in its purest form. The essential nature of the personality pertains to this neutral self, and it is in this sense that the later remark in the verse applies, namely, that the self is to be looked upon as raised solely by the grace of God, as the child of immortality. Thathan, father mine, is here rendered, sole parent mine. Thathan is a word of endearment applied to any parent, including the grandfather, and sometimes even to a child. It has no relevance for the particular generation. Ancestor and heir become interchangeable in its intimately pure connotation. It is representative of the protective principle in the abstract, whether conceived prospectively or retrospectively. If all that now forgotten suffering should be revived within, I would this very day fall and perish in flames, alas. Alone thou didst then provide those outlets 5 of sense. O Father mine of gold! Even thus to know, thou, zero Lord, permittest. Retrospection, when overladen with regretful memories of suffering, must be detrimental to progress in the usual sense. It is of the nature of a self-consuming fire, as the Sanskrit word, tapam, regret sufficiently well recognizes, i.e. thap, to burn. In this negative state of self-immolating memory, the senses have a corrective or balancing role. They hold the interests on newer and ever newer objects. Life is thus diverted into progressive channels of normal activity. This helps to balance and maintain the metabolism and the life of the tender being in normal consciousness. Integrated and unified consciousness can reflect on its own nature. And thus, through the balancing of the senses, the personality is able to attain to full human knowledge. Such self-knowledge can theoretically imply more. As the Guru Narayana himself points out, lucid retrospection need not be an impediment to wisdom. The implications here deserve detailed and separate examination which we shall defer for later consideration. Alone thou didst then provide those outlets 5 of sense. Single quote. The ambivalent aspects of life have to be maintained at a certain equilibrium so that life and self-realization may be possible. The higher values depend on the more basic ones. As when the Bhagavad Gita says that the gods are to be propitiated by sacrifice. And they in turn would then shower graces on man. A reciprocity is suggested here between what memory implies and what the senses represent. One cannot exist without the other. Like sin and grace in theological discussions, the relation here is to be understood in both its implications at once. As the Tamil Tirukkural puts it, in connection with rain, should the sky run dry, there would be neither festivals nor worship for the gods here. The circulation of ambivalent factors and values of good and bad goes hand in hand and has to be understood intuitively in its global entirety. O Father mine of gold! The reference to a father of gold is to indicate that matter itself is not to be thought of as divorced from any idea of the supreme principle. The thinking substance of Spinoza comes near to this way of looking at the reality which is at once immanent and transcendent. Unarnal, rendered, should be revived within, means more literally, waking to the past. Sleep and dream are alike memories in the subconscious. At the conscious level we are awake where another set of tendencies come into operation, more in relation to the objective, empirical or actual. Purivithal, rendered, outlets 5 of sense, would be more literally, doors. The senses have been compared to windows, and, together with the other bodily orifices, They have been referred to in the Bhagavad Gita as the gates of a city. Reflexive thought is also a higher function involving the positive aspects of the personality. That mother of mine who, as a burden bore me within, with a tender melting heart, vainly breathing many a sigh, fuming hot, in pain she brought me forth, to lie here, howling on like a jackal, for once deigned to tell me, Lord, what all this can be about. The picture painted here is so realistic that it calls for little comment. There is even a touch of humor in this very realistic form of adoration, especially at its tail end, like the sting of an epigram. With a tender melting heart, in pain, howling on like a jackal. The painful heat and the tenderness of feelings alternate in the mother, making life a pendulum swinging between two extreme poles. The mother has pain in giving birth, as the child shows pain in being born, by crying. The final question is therefore pertinent and cannot be answered with logic one way or the other. The cyclic rotation of samsara, or the wheel of life, is here summed up. It revolves between the ambivalent factors and tendencies at the root of life itself, a continuous cyclic movement. No philosophy or science offers an answer to these questions, which involve an understanding of the numinous absolute. Only the silence of the Guru can represent an answer. Ventul is in Jew, literally, cooked and melted loose within, has been rendered, fuming hot, with a tender melting heart, and shifted round to give the meaning in English. Full well aware art thou, good Lord of all. Hence what need is there for humble me to tell? Do banish, pray, all agony. Thy servant has no one here, and if thou me disown, then all is lost, O Savior coming mounted on a bull. In the last lines the Guru links up the whole composition with the prehistoric Shiva tradition and affiliates the entire theme to the doctrines of the perennial philosophy or mysticism. The duality as between the supreme providence and the adoring self here is the cause of all the agony or suffering referred to above. Mutual recognition of the bipolar interdependence between the supreme and the ontological self is strikingly restated here by way of conclusion. The two aspects being brought together into close reciprocity for purposes of contemplative understanding of the one in terms of the other. The allusion in the last line is to Shiva, who rides a bull and saves lives, as against Yama or Kala, the god of death, who is represented symbolically as riding on a black buffalo. This final reference to the Shiva bull, who is the white Nandi, adds that characteristic depth to the composition, reaching back to prehistory and to that virile principle of positive life in the symbology and mythology of Shiva, which we have outlined in earlier chapters. The Markandeya Purana describes the way in which Shiva, mounted on a white bull, the Nandi, appears on the scene at the very last moment of the death of a young man who was destined to die at the age of 16. Death or Kala claims the life at the appointed hour, but the savior on the white bull comes at last as the youth's final refuge, in his hour of extreme despair. Such is one of the images which this verse revives in the time-honored context of contemplative word wisdom.